I am extremely excited to introduce our next speaker, Muneeb. Muneeb is the co-creator of Stacks. He's also the CEO of Trust Machines. Trust Machines is currently helping on the Nakamoto release, which is going to make quite a few dramatic improvements to Stacks, and they're also working on SBTC, which is a fantastic decentralized Bitcoin bridging solution with economic security between Bitcoin Layer 1 and Stacks. So very, very excited to bring Muneeb up to speak to us next. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
All right, thanks a lot. Well, I'm pretty excited to be here in Nashville. Like, I think it's a interesting time to be in Bitcoin. 10 years ago, I think it would be hard to imagine that a former U.S. president would be coming to a Bitcoin conference, and I think that's happening tomorrow. So I think what I was thinking about this talk, and these slides might be a bit outdated, give people a little bit background on Bitcoin history, where are things coming from, and go over some of the different architectural designs, right? Like, what are the different choices? Because we see, all these projects that are going off, they're trying out like different designs, different architectures, different sort of like, experiments that are running, which by the way are great for decentralization. This is how our industry grows. We have all these projects like, ICP and Solana and Ethereum and others, and they're trying out different experiments. But I want to sort of like put forward the sort of like technical design or the school of thought that we believe in. And I think the way I would sort of like present it is as a series of disagreements with Vitalik, right? So there's some history there, and I thought we'll walk over that. So I think first of all, I'm a big Bitcoin believer. I started in around 2013. So believe it or not, there was a time that I would only buy Bitcoin when it would dip below $100, because above $100 it was too expensive. And little did we know what's going to happen down the road. But over time, I think being a computer scientist, being an engineer at heart, I got attracted to Bitcoin, the technology first, and it actually took me a couple of years to understand Bitcoin, the monetary asset, the fixed supply, the fact that it's neutral money, anyone can come and try to build around it, and it's censorship resistant, and it's like a neutral playing ground for different countries, even conflicting parties, to come in and sort of like agree on a standard for money. And it took me a while, and the more time I spent, the more sort of like belief I had in Bitcoin moving forward. So this is like around 2016, 2017, Ethereum was launching, Ethereum was starting off, and I think at that time it was like a smaller project compared to Bitcoin. It still is, and I think at that time, like, we got into these like series of like very public arguments, like most of crypto happens on Twitter between me and Vitalik, right? So there were three main arguments and three main points there. The first was that Vitalik is in the camp that you're building a application platform. So Ethereum is, Turing complete. People are building an application platform, and with the usage of those apps, you will see internet money emerge. I and other Bitcoiners are in the camp that you start with base money, you actually try to figure out how to have digital money first, and that has very different properties, right? Like, it needs to be durable, it needs to be simple, like a hard cap asset, a chain that is extremely, extremely hard to change, and then, you can build the economy around it. Like, years after, I think I would say that people are, the jury is still out there, right? Like, no one has clearly won in terms of like what the internet money is going to be. People would argue that Ethereum is being used more for NFT trading, although ordinals have changed that now, or for stable coin swaps or other online use cases. But I think in terms of real world acceptance as Bitcoin as money, with large institutions coming in or public companies building treasuries for Bitcoin, I think I'm more on the opinion that Bitcoin is winning there. So I think that's like the first thing, that what's the base layer? Do you start with money or do you start with an application platform? And the interesting thing that happened with the rise of Bitcoin L2s the last couple of years is that now the applications are coming to Bitcoin. So it is becoming possible to move your BTC from the L1 into an L2 and start using applications. That's like the first, I think, core design difference and between Bitcoin and Ethereum and maybe some of the other approaches. So the one way to think about this is Bitcoin is like $1 trillion asset, and most of that is underutilized right now. It's not programmable. Less than 1% of Bitcoin is actually deployed anywhere. And Ethereum, because it started with being an application platform, it's very actively deployed. I think more than 35% of ETH is actively deployed. That also means that on the Bitcoin side, you have this like massive opportunity that there's programmable money. People can come and do different things with it. And by the way, you're open to all types of experimentation here. It doesn't have to be Bitcoin L2s, and the term itself is, people can argue over it. Bitcoin can be brought to other networks as well. I think ICP has that. Other projects are also looking at ways to bring BTC there. And all of that actually helps BTC, the asset, and the programmability of Bitcoin. So that, I think, is actually one of the most untapped opportunities in our industry, where there's $1 trillion of pristine capital that's mostly just sitting there and it's not being programmed, not being deployed right now. And so the next thing is about scalability, and that's a pretty interesting argument that still is going on in many ways. Like, how are you going to scale blockchains? So back in the same time frame, 2016, 2017, people would remember Ethereum was trying to do sharding. So they're like, hey, we're going to scale L1 through sharding, and a bunch of us were clearly in the camp of like L2s. That L2s are the way to go forward. I wouldn't get into a lot of technical sort of like arguments there. So this is argument number 2 with Vitalik. And I think the scorecard on that is that even Ethereum has now thrown away their sharding plans and all the research around sharding, and they have adopted a L2 roadmap that Ethereum is going to scale with L2s. And I think the question to ask is, well, if in the end all the applications on Ethereum will be running on L2s, then might as well run them on Bitcoin L2s, right? So that's sort of like a place that we start getting into. But and I think some version of this argument also stays, in the sense that if you look at Solana or Toli, he's still trying to say you'll have like a asynchronous. You won't have like a modular design, but we can try to scale those things. I think those experiments are still valid, but I would say most of the industry at this point, including most people who are building in Bitcoin, they're sort of the opinion that L2s is the way forward, roll-ups or other type of platforms that's happening. But I think some version of this argument is still playing out, but at least Ethereum has sort of like, given up, that we are not going to try and scale the L1 itself. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing that has happened in the last 5 years. So I don't know how familiar people are in terms of the Bitcoin landscape, but they're sort of like, I would say 2 large Bitcoin L2s, Lightning and Stacks. They both started in like late 2017. Stacks is the project that I started. The big difference between them is Lightning is a state channel, so it's mostly focused on payments. It's not a blockchain. So it comes with pros and cons, and Stacks is more like a typical chain, right? Like and the next version of Stacks that's coming up, it's pretty exciting. I'll sort of like go over it. But Bitcoin went through like these dark ages, and it was around like 2017, and so when Bitcoin went through this like civil war where there were forks of Bitcoin happening, a lot of devs actually got kicked out, and that is the time when a lot of developers started going to Ethereum. And it was sort of like interesting that a lot of the industry would think that people aren't interested in building on Bitcoin, or it's like a pet rock, you can't do much with it. And that has changed a lot in the last 2 years. Like, we have done a ton of work there. We've tried creating like a very healthy developer community, tried educating a lot of people, but it's amazing to see that happen now, especially with Ordinals and other Bitcoin L2 projects starting. Capital is flowing in, developers are coming in, and it really feels like a healthy market now again. And I'm so glad that developers are sort of like coming back to the mothership of Bitcoin. So I think with all of these different projects coming in, again, an architectural design decision is what type of bridging technology are you using? What type of consensus is being used in these L2s? And finally, what type of programming environment are you exposing to developers? So I wouldn't go into the details of this, but there's some pretty exciting work. Like our work is mostly based on threshold signatures, but there's some interesting things like BitVM, where you can have a completely trustless way of moving Bitcoin from a L1 to L2 and then back. These things are in R&D stages right now, in various different R&D stages. They're not like fully production ready at this point. Similarly, on the consensus side, people are looking at rollups. People are looking at like other ways that what's the consensus for L2? How do you get Bitcoin finality? How do you try to get as much benefit from Bitcoin security as you can? And we're seeing a bunch of EVM chains. We're seeing a bunch of like other types of programming environments come up as well. But the high level sort of like lesson for me is that the open market is doing its work. People are coming in, they're taking different approaches, they're throwing different experiments on the wall. In the next like 2-3 years, we'll see what sticks, what doesn't stick. The Bitcoin L2s actually remain like a pretty small market right now, relatively speaking. It's like 4 or 5 billion, depends on how you measure it. Stacks is approximately 80% of the market, but we want to see the full market grow. Like Ethereum L2s are something like an 80 billion market, and I think Bitcoin is a 3 times larger asset. So I think once more of BTC capital starts getting unlocked, starts getting deployed in these systems, you'll likely see a ton of developer activity, a ton of usage coming in. So in terms of sort of like stage of maturity, Bitcoin L2s remain at a pretty early stage compared to what we have seen outside in the industry. So I think I'll take a little while to explain some of the lessons that we learned. So Stacks first version went live in early 2021. And I think looking back, coming from the Bitcoin community, I think we were over-indexing on decentralization and security. So the L2 will produce a block every time Bitcoin L1 is producing a block. That's anywhere between 10 to 40 minutes. And from a UX perspective, that's horrible UX. Right? Like especially when a lot of users are getting used to Solana or other systems where the speeds are much faster. That was our first sort of like lesson, that yes, decentralization matters, but for L2s, you really need to solve the UX problem, because Bitcoin L1 is never going to change. Bitcoin is never going to have faster blocks. But I think that is something that can be done at the L2 level. And the next major release of Stacks called Nakamoto basically effectively focuses on that and solves that challenge. The second thing was also interesting, that whenever you sort of like bootstrap a new ecosystem, let's pick a project like Avalanche or something. In the beginning, they don't have a lot of economic security, or however you're measuring that security. And one good thing about Bitcoin is that if you can figure out a way to reuse Bitcoin hash power, then as soon as you're launching a new project, you can be secured by 100% of Bitcoin hash power. That's a very interesting problem that we've been tackling as well. And with the Nakamoto release, finality properties are going to be that when you do a transaction on the L2, as soon as a Bitcoin block comes, to reverse that transaction, you'll have to go and fork Bitcoin L1. So you'd have to attack the Bitcoin miners and try to reorg Bitcoin to be able to reverse that transaction. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing, especially if you're launching a new project. Like instead of worrying about how am I going to have enough economic power or hash power to really secure my network, you can actually just reuse Bitcoin hash power that's already there and try to build your network that way. Yeah, so I think in general, one of the things that sort of like stands out about Stacks is back in the day we did the first ever SEC qualified offering. It was for various reasons we wanted to be fully compliant and enable the US retail folks to be able to participate as well. And at that time we didn't fully realize that because of the SEC qualified offering, we would have to decentralize a lot as well. Right? So over the years, what happened was before the mainnet launch, the original sort of like company was dismantled, and a lot of sort of like independent companies and individuals started working in the ecosystem. For example, I went off and raised capital in an independent company called Trust Machines, and that's how we sort of like participate in the ecosystem. that's another thing of the Stacks ecosystem, that when people start to engage with it, they're sort of like surprised that there's no large foundation, there's no like large entity that does core development. It's an extremely decentralized ecosystem that sometimes could be challenging as well, like because there's a lot of overhead and working with each other and trying to figure out how to proceed. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to build on Bitcoin, and then and you are a decentralized ecosystem that kind of like goes hand in hand with the ethos of Bitcoin. So any one of these companies can disappear. There are a bunch of others as well. But I think the open source project and the software and what we're building would sort of like survive from there. So hopefully, I think this was helpful to get some background knowledge on what has been happening in Bitcoin, what were sort of like, the reasons for why we didn't see a lot of development happen in Bitcoin for a while. What's the new exciting things? What has changed in the last 2 years? And it's not just Stacks. There are literally like 20, 30 other Bitcoin L2 projects that are launching. And there are a lot of effort to bring BTC to other ecosystems as well. I know you people might be familiar with what's going on with ICP. And I think that's interesting that if Bitcoin is the best money, you can literally take it not just to an L2, but other L1 projects and other ecosystems as well, and try to use it over there. In the end, like I think that all benefits Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is sort of like the market leader. If Bitcoin benefits, everybody else in our ecosystem also benefits. With that, thank you so much.